Morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those of our colleagues who are in Africa at the moment. Thank you for joining us today to really launch Ethics First. My name is Lars Benson, and I'm the Regional Director for Africa at SIPE. SIPE, as we call it, was started in 1983 and is affiliated to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and is part of the National Endowment for Democracy. Since 1983, we have been working in many different areas, including supporting chambers and associations, businesses, think tanks, and the civil society across the world. Currently, SIPE is in about 200 countries. SIPE's vision is really to create a world where democracy delivers the freedom and opportunity for all to prosper. So Lola, if we can go ahead and start the slides, please. So today we're launching Ethics First. And just briefly, Ethics First is a free, innovative platform designed for African companies to acquire corporate governance, business integrity, and compliance capacity information at scale, with the aim of providing businesses with premium opportunities for growth and investment by global investors and partners. Ethics First offers companies a pathway to improve their risk management and corporate governance systems and to increase profitability and reduce opportunities for internal misconduct and fraud. So SIPE has been working on anti-corruption issues since we started in 1983, and we've been working on anti-corruption across many different continents. But speaking specifically about Africa, what businesses face in Africa is an extreme challenge in terms of an environment where it really does pay to get involved in corruption, either in terms of facilitation payments or in terms of bribery to secure government contracts, or in many, many different types of ways. And so if the cost of engaging in corrupt behavior is such that the incentives are not there for being dedicated towards ethics and integrity, I don't think we're going to ever really be able to change some of the challenges facing individual countries across the continent. So Ethics First is really about SIPE's attempt and SIPE's effort to reduce the challenges of integrity on the continent and to increase the economic cost of engaging in corrupt activities. Next slide, please. And so SIPE works on anti-corruption efforts in Africa really by focusing on what can the private sector do to limit opportunities for corruption. And we do this through three main flagship programs, of which one of them is Ethics First. The other two include a network, it's called the Africa Business Integrity Network. And this is a network that SIPE established in 2017 across 11 countries on the continent with over 13 individual partners that provides anti-corruption compliance services in terms of training, in terms of consulting, and in terms of auditing services to small and medium enterprises across the continent. The other flagship program that SIPE has started is something that we call the Africa Business Ethics Conference. This is a conference that SIPE holds either once a year or twice a year. The last one was in Nigeria with our partners, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And we will be again hosting ABEC in December in Kenya. Now, the purpose of ABEC is to talk about private sector solutions to combating corruption. It is about celebrating what the business community is doing well in terms of the efforts to promote integrity and to fight against corruption. Next slide, please. And here is a slide talking about the Africa Business Integrity Network. And there's more information on both of those programs in on SIPE's webpage. So what is Ethics First? Ethics First really has three main goals. The first is to offer free and affordable compliance services at scale across the continent. The second is to promote a culture and to reward ethical companies. The third is to solve third-party risk problems for local and global investors operating in Africa. So Ethics First is essentially about information. It's about collecting information about companies that are committed towards ethics and integrity. And then it is a way of potentially creating incentives in terms of identifying potential investors and potential customers and potential suppliers that really want to work with ethical companies. This is becoming ever increasingly important as we start to consider how global Africa truly is in terms of as we're building connections to Europe, the United States, and to Asia. But it's also important when we start to think about what this might mean for the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which everybody knows was launched and is now being rolled out across the continent. So how does, next slide, please. So how does Ethics First really work? It's quite simple. What it is talking about is that a company would come to the Ethics First website and they would begin a registration process. As part of this process, they're going to be based on their industry, based on their revenues, based on the perceived risk. They will be going through and answering either 20 or 40 indicators or 50 indicators as it relates to how good or how robust is their compliance systems. Once companies have gone through this assessment, they're going to go and be part of potentially 3 different levels within Ethics First. And the goal here is to help African companies improve their compliance management systems within each of their own compliance trajectory. And really that means that everybody's at a different stage or a different level in terms of anti-corruption compliance. And this is an effort to begin to sort of focus and reward those companies on their journey as they are essentially through this effort. So what we're talking about here is 3 levels. The green level is essentially that we expect the companies to sign an integrity, the leadership of companies to sign an integrity pledge, and they will go through and really do a diagnostic of their company in terms of to understand where they are and where perhaps some of the risks might be identified. The silver level is a company that has essentially remediated or fixed or improved some of their compliance systems and management systems within the company. And at the same time, it requires that the leadership has gone through and committed and really taken and can demonstrate that they've taken training around ethics and integrity and compliance, which is then also uploaded. Both in terms of the green and the silver levels, companies go ahead and input this information into Ethics First. When we get to the gold level, companies will then acquire or be asked to go and get an independent verification. And this information will then be verified. And companies will then, therefore, be, if they are successful in terms of their compliance systems, they will be invited to become part of the gold listing. Now, this Ethics First effort was initiated by SIPE and is really talking about a strategic partnership, both between SIPE and many, many different organizations and companies. Some of these include the APIN network, the Africa Business Integrity Network that we were talking about earlier. But this also includes other chambers and business associations. It includes other financial institutions, and it includes even individuals. And so SIPE is continuing to search and solicit strategic partnerships So if anybody is on this webinar and is interested in further information, we welcome for you to reach out to SIPE and to have a further conversation. But in addition, SIPE has recruited a really an outstanding group of individuals that are experts in their field with regards to anti-corruption compliance. And these experts are serving on the Expert Ethics First Advisory Committee, and they will be speaking to you in a little while. Next slide. The first of these is Dr. Amy Jade, who is the CEO of LADL, and this is a 500 million free trade zone. She was also on UNDP's steering committee with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals. And she's considered one of the top 25 Africans to watch by the Financial Times. Next slides, please. We also are happy to have here today Bill Steinman. Bill Steinman is the founder of the law firm Steinman and Rogers, which provides services to companies on FCPA. He's considered an expert authority on engaging third parties. And he's also a professor at Catholic University and Roger and Williams University. Next slide, please. We're also pleased to introduce Mohammed Kamara, who has agreed to serve on the advisory committee. He's the General Counsel and Compliance Officer for Nestle in West and Central Africa. He works on good governance standards and codes of business for 5 multinationals. And he's an Africa expert on operations management, corporate governance, and regulatory matters. And finally, we are also introducing today Tom Fox. He's a lawyer and a consultant providing companies with anti-bribery services, as well as international transaction. He is the author of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics blog, and he is not only a columnist and a frequent blogger for Compliance Week and the SCCE magazine. He's the founder of Compliance Podcast Network and is frequently sharing with us his wisdom about all things compliance. So these are the advisory committee that we've asked to join at SIPE, and today was our first meeting. And really the purpose of the advisory committee is to provide advice on ethics first. And this includes, as it relates to compliance standards, the evaluation standards and benchmarks, to make sure that we are providing value services to African companies across the continent. They're also going to be asked as part of the advisory committee to periodically review and recommend revisions to this program as we have launched it across the continent. And then finally, they are going to be the committee that approves the goal status of firms that I was talking about previously. So with that, I am happy to hand over to my colleague Lola, that is part of a large team here at SIPE that is really working on developing and producing and rolling out Ethics First across the continent. Lola, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laz. It's truly a pleasure to be working with these new members of the advisory committee. It's my delight once again to welcome all of them to the SIPE family. That is really a big family, with the Africa Business Integrity Network present in 11 countries now and growing, and with strategic partners also spread across at least 2 countries and growing. So with that, I just want to say again, thank you so much to Bill, to Amy, to Mohammed, and to Thomas, and we look forward to working with you. In the next few minutes, I have the honor of having a conversation that I'm sure most of you have probably had with your colleagues with Dr. Amy Jade, one of the members of the advisory committee, well, two of the members of the advisory committee, which would include Dr. Amy Jade and Mr. Mohammed Kamara. Mr. Mohammed, if you don't mind, and Dr. Amy, if you don't mind, please turn on your camera so everyone can see you. If you've already done that, pardon me, I can see a limited view from here. And we would really just be talking about, corruption from the perspective of a business operator in Africa. As you all have heard, and I'm sure many of you are familiar to some extent with Ethics First, but even if you're not, by the end of today, you would certainly already be thinking about ways that Ethics First can help you achieve some of the shared objectives that we've already conceptualized. So in this conversation, we would really be saying, how do businesses operating in many parts of West, East, Southern Africa, how do we experience, or how do businesses experience the effects of corruption? And the idea behind asking this question is really to get to solutions that work, solutions that are sustainable. And that's really what Ethics First tries to do. So with that, I'm just going to see Dr. Amy. Great. And Mr. Mohammed, good. You're both here. So if you don't mind, do feel free to turn on your mic. I do want to come to you first, Dr. Amy, to really just, have you give us from your perspective of, setting up a free trade area or free trade zone, high net worth free trade zone. So you're certainly interacting with multiple regulatory agencies in the biggest economy on the continent. What has been your experience with, corruption challenges, but also how has the high level of corruption impacted your business and your growth capabilities?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on this wonderful initiative. So I think our business is a long-term business where we developed infrastructure over the past 20 years, and we plan to keep doing that for another 20, 30, 40 years. And so we're heavily invested in the country. And we are also working in highly regulated industries. The biggest issue we had was the fact that we were initially operating in a market where private sector wasn't really welcome. But we decided to develop the special economic zone as a private sector endeavor because our aim was, over the long term, to enable things which hadn't been done in Nigeria to happen. In order to do that, you need infrastructure, facilities, know-how, you need to dramatically lower costs, but you also need transparency. And you cannot build a private sector business as we have from scratch unless you make sure that it is fully compliant. So we meet all the international standards, and we take our time to walk through every stage of every interaction we have with the authorities to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's. Now, what's the impact of operating like that? So the positive impact is that you have a very strong, compelling value proposition. So to our major clients, we halve their costs of doing business. So the value proposition, when you cut corruption out of it, is very strong. Also, it's important for us to remember that corruption breeds incompetence. And so if you want to develop a company that's doing things that have never been done in Africa before, and that company needs to be sustainable, you need really good people. And the majority of people in the world, and the African continent is no different, and Nigeria is certainly no different, want to go to work and they want to have respect for themselves and respect for the company they're working with, especially if they're really good at their job. The best, the smartest people, the hardest working people want to be in a company that has high levels of integrity. So building a strong team requires that level of compliance and transparency. So there are a raft of positives, and I think it's important we always emphasize that. The negatives are, it takes a really long time. So an approval that some people get in a day, you may not get in a year. And that is the reality. You know, things take time. And you find, therefore, in my experience, that the best people for pushing through and developing businesses in a sustainable, transparent way without corruption are actually indigents. You know, SMEs are good at this, and they have to be good at this. Small, medium, and larger companies are good at this when they're indigenous and they want to add value. Because if you develop your business, as we have developed Ladol, it's hard work. It's going to take a long time. You're going to come across a lot of opposition, a lot of hurdles, particularly when you're bringing transparency to an opaque, expensive market. And so the best people to do that are actually indigents of the countries where these challenges are being faced. And it's the indigents that can then create a space where international companies can partner with them or can come in and operate on their own with the same levels of compliance and integrity that you see in other parts of the world.
That's really interesting. I don't think we've ever really thought about it like that. I know we've come across scenarios where it's the multinationals and the larger companies that have the, you know, clout to resist paying a bribe, for instance. And unfortunately, the small businesses or the local businesses sometimes don't have that, you know, sort of bargaining power. But that's an interesting, very interesting perspective, because if local businesses that make up the majority of the private sector resist corruption, that can lead to systemic and more sustainable change. I'm curious, Mr. Mohammed, I want to come to you to, you know, from your perspective, here you are, I believe you're in Accra, and, you know, you're overseeing compliance for a fast consumer moving goods, a company in that sector or industry. So I can imagine you're interacting with a lot of third parties, small companies across at least 4 or 5 markets in West Africa. From your perspective, do you want to weigh in on this question, you know, to the extent that you're comfortable doing that?
Thank you, Lula, and thank you, Dr. Emi. Yeah, look, I think what Dr. Emi has said is kind of spot on. And I just want maybe just to give you a kind of real life situation of one instances that I personally have witnessed here on the continent. And this happened some years ago about how can you resist to corruption and what's the benefit for you. I think a few years ago we had, I'm a lawyer by the way, so we had a very strong lawsuits in one of the West Africa country, and it was with one of the distributor of the company who I was working for. To be honest with you, the case were very well documented. We had all the merit, all the legal ground, all the legal merit to terminate that agreement, and we won from the High Court up to the Court of Appeal, and then the case ended before the Supreme Court. And surprisingly, I was back then in Senegal. I got a call from someone at Supreme Court that the president of the Supreme Court of that country wanted to meet someone from the company I was working for. And obviously, because I was the lawyer, so I flew into that country. I met the president of the Supreme Court, and this is what he told me. You guys have a very strong case, okay? And if I have to stick by the law, you will win the case. But I want to be honest with you and transparent. This is what your defendant has proposed to me and what you guys are ready to put on the table so that I go by your way. And because back then I was working for a very strong multinational with very strong governance framework, it was clear in my mind that there is no way I would be paying something for a verdict that is due to me, okay? And we said, no, we are not going to pay. We lost the case, Okay, we really lost the case, and I'm talking about a risk of 16 million US dollar. And the direct consequence for not only for the company, but for the country was first that multinational decided to close its operation in that country. So people lost their job, the country lost revenue, but also from a reputational standpoint, we also engaged from diplomatic standpoint through the ambassador of that country to talk to the local authority. So clearly, in terms of what do you have to gain and what do you have to lose, for me, when it comes to compliance, I would say, particularly for our countries, you have more to lose than to gain. And that's the truth. Just sharing that live example that I personally witnessed, and where you could see the difference between someone who wants to stick by the book and someone who wants to find his own way, not in the interest of, say, the law or in the interest of the country, but for his own interest.
That's a terrific example, Mr. Kamara. It reminds me of the Goodyear Tire Company case, where the investigation led the US Department of Justice to Kenya. And following that case, the company closed down its operations in the country. And like you're saying, you know, lots of jobs went with that. So I want to come to something that you've highlighted. And to give you some time to just get a drink, I can go to Dr. Amy and come back to you. And that's the fact that when you got this offer, you had the sufficient organizational orientation about what your ethics policy was within your company. And so you could quickly respond to that. In many of our countries with high levels of corruption and really a blurred line between what's right and what's wrong, when it comes to ethical practices, it's important for companies to really be able to strengthen their organizational culture. But that's a challenge for many companies on the continent, especially the small ones and the ones that would most likely not have the sort of competent people that, Amy, you referred to. So with these compliance challenges that companies experience on the continent, what's your advice to companies, small and large, about how to close that compliance gap? I know Lars has mentioned that we're working hard on that with the network on business integrity, but do you have any tips that perhaps have helped you close the compliance capacity and skill gap in your company, and as well as in small companies that are in your supply chain? So maybe Amy, if you could start, that would be great, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Kamara.
Okay, thank you. So I think I want to contextualize this with a broader lens. I don't think it's accurate to say or to paint a picture where the corruption is all from local people and local companies. Corruption is quite often instigated. And so if you look at, for example, if we want to go back in history, the East India Company, the British set up in India, was heroically corrupt. And this was, and a lot of the collapse was to do with the corruption. And what happened there was you had, the foremost multinational company in the world sending people out to India. And those people saw opportunities to increase their wealth to a level that they had never, envisioned they could, and they did terrible things. They instigated corruption in that country, and they rewarded local people who helped them in that endeavor, and excluded local people who didn't. So I think it's important when tackling corruption to understand how it works, where the incentives lie. And as I say, for local people, these are our countries. We don't want our countries to be corrupt. A local person does not have the finance to support, a corrupt organization. And they don't have the incentive in a way that some foreign companies have, because those foreign companies want a shortcut. they want minimal exposure, and they just want the person who can sign their document. Whereas, you know, those of us in the market who are long-term investors particularly need to work through the process. So first of all, you know, there is a question here about incentives, and this is a universal problem. We have to find out why it is that certain individuals on the ground, whether foreign or domestic, behave in a certain way. And compliance procedures are a part of it. So what is the character of the company? Is this a company that is truly transparent? What are they reporting? Well, to what extent do they go to ensure that contracts that are given out are compliant with their policies and procedures? And what is the level of accountability? And again, this goes for local and international companies. If malpractice is found, what happens? Who is accountable? And how visible is that accountability to others in the company? Because if your boss is stealing, why wouldn't you steal? You know, and if your boss is not following the rules, and it's obvious he's not following the rules, and there's no penalty for that, then, you know, why wouldn't you do the same thing? So having the written down procedures, absolutely essential, but also having a culture where there is accountability and there is transparency is really important. And the ability to not demonize, I think, is really critical here, because I think being really scientific about this and explaining to people what the cost is to the company, to themselves, to their society of corruption. You know, we're all smart people. So you explain to people, look, you have a choice. You can behave in this way and this will be the outcome, or you can behave in this way and this will be the outcome. And it is enormously hard. I agree with Mohammed, it's hard. But to be honest, I have found, and we've had some really tough times in my company, but I still believe to today that, you know, some of the people, you know, I know with the highest levels of integrity are Nigerians, you know, and some of them are Nigerian government officials who in really tough situations, under enormous pressure to do the wrong thing, have done the right thing for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. And quite often there is an asymmetry of information, there is a lack of experience and exposure, but people recognize the right thing when they see it. And then it's just a question of what is the framework within which they're working. And if you're in a private company, we can set up the right frameworks, we can set up the right culture, we can make sure that we promote and support the right people through the company. If you're in public sector, it's obviously a lot more complicated.
Gosh, you really raised a lot of excellent points. I'm looking at the time and it's just such a disappointment that we don't have so much time, because I have so many more questions and things to talk about. And I see some comments in the chat box that, gosh, it'll be nice to take some of them, but we have a very interesting panel coming up after this. And I know our panelists are itching to, you know, talk about some of the things that you so eloquently raised. So let me give Mr. Mohammed, let me give you a minute to respond to that as well. I would have liked to ask you, you know, a follow-up question to, you know, to this about how you see ethics first solving some of the challenges that, you know, we've identified. But really, in your response right now, I could go and write a few essays about that. So I'll come to you, Mr. Mohammed, and right after that, I'll introduce Ethics First with a video and hand over to our very able implementing partner, Asoko Insight. So, Mr. Mohammed, do you want to weigh in on this for about a minute or two?
Yes, thank you, Lola. Look, I think Dr. Emi once again has said it all about setting up the tone right from the top, and also making sure that the character of your company is right from the beginning is known. That's, for me, would be one of the way to already let your relevant stakeholders know that this is me, this is how I do things. I do things by the book. But I think for me, the most important thing as well that Dr. Emily just mentioned is also about establishing a culture of compliance. Compliance does not have to be let's say, a routine activities. It has to be an everyday business, really everyday business, and it has to be a culture. Be it small SME, be it big multinational, be it government entities. This has to be an everyday business. And once you are able to build that character and be known and have that an entity or a company, a corporation that has a DNA of a strong compliance entity, I think at the end of the day, people will stick to that and will be treated like that. That's one. I think the second thing also that is also very important, that I think sometimes we kind of miss even in big multinational. Dr. Amy, I agree with you. If your boss is stealing, why would I not steal myself? Okay, is consequence management. And this for me should be across board at every level. There should be within that framework a consequence management that if you do the wrong thing, there's a consequence that will apply to you, no matter who you are and what you've done. I think one thing I like about this part of the world in West Africa, when, for instance, you have an issue with a high-profile person, the first question they will ask you is, do you know who I am? Do you know who you are dealing with? Okay, that means that if you want to be in trouble with me, I will make sure that the rest of your life is going to be miserable. But once you have a consequence management system in place and you stick to it, those are things that people know, no matter who I am, what I've done, there will be a consequence and I will pay for it. I think those are just few contributions I just wanted to add to what Dr. Amy just said.
Yes, that's a terrific point, and a very good note to end on. I see that you
can I make a really quick point? I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm going to be so quick, but I just want to say that how Ethics First will help is, number one, rewarding and highlighting compliant companies, and number two, creating a network of compliant companies. You know, we need to create a movement, a groundswell of companies that are connected, that are doing the right thing and sharing best practice.
That's awesome. Mr. Mohammed, did you want to add that, or I could take it from you and put it in the chat? But fantastic. Yes, I completely agree with that. This is being recorded, so you can be sure I'm going back to take verbatim what you just said. And just as I go on to this video, I want to say thank you very much to both of you for, on the short notice, taking the time to have a chat with us from your perspectives. We wanted to give you this opportunity to really share some of your passion and why you are on the advisory committee with, you know, our affiliates and partners from all over the world that have joined in. So really, thank you very much. We look forward to continuing this conversation. I'm going to go on to play a video for everyone to see how we describe Ethics First. There's just so much to say about Ethics First, but you know, from the last few things that Dr. Amy and Mr. Kamara just said, I'd really like to emphasize that when companies try to use Ethics First to implement their compliance systems, we take them on a journey that helps them change the culture within their organization. And that's really at the heart of it. So compliance is not just rules. It's actually an everyday effort to change the culture within an organization. So I'll play this video, and right after this video, I won't come back on. So thank you very much for listening, but I'll leave you in very good hands with Muketsi. Muketsi is from Asoko Insights. Asoko is an implementing partner of Ethics First, and I'll let Muketsi do the introduction of himself and the excellent panel that we have lined up for you right after this video. So thank you so much and enjoy watching. To reduce corruption in Africa, we need cooperation from the business community. 50% of small businesses operate in the informal economy, a haven for non-transparency and non-accountability. Now, the other half find the cost of business integrity very high and the cost of corruption very low. So, the socio-economic dynamics is skewed in favor of corruption. But with global and regional partners across Africa, we developed a demand-driven initiative that can change that skewed dynamic one business
at a time. It's called Ethics First.
Enter Ethics First, an innovative new platform that is doing that by giving small businesses a road to improving their governance in a recognizable and standardized way and increasing their visibility to global partners and financiers. It is the business-led answer to Africa's compliance needs. Aimed at enhancing the integration of African small businesses into global supply chains, Ethics First offers a low-cost digital solution for businesses to strengthen their governance in anti-corruption management systems and boost their global reputation. How does it work? African companies are invited to register on Ethics First and follow the program to demonstrate this trend of their commitment to the Ethics First values. www.ethicsfirst.sipe.org in 3 stages. Green, business leaders sign an integrity pledge that commits them to an ongoing process of enhancing their company's governance and compliance systems within a specified time frame. Silver, demonstrate enhanced anti-bribery and compliance measures appropriate for the size of the business and ensure effective leadership commitment to corporate ethics and integrity. Gold, complete an independent compliance and due diligence, verification and a review by the Ethics First Compliance Advisory Committee.
Stakeholders for Ethics First include African governments, African business, and civil society. For example, African governments have the ability to improve public procurement transparency during a crisis like COVID-19. Indeed, Ethics First has the potential to create a world where business reduces corruption, resulting in improved public service delivery, economic growth and opportunity, and a life better for everyone.
Thank you very much for that video, Lola. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. As Lola had indicated earlier, my name is Mukudze Morerwe with Osoko Insight, and we are an implementing partner for the Ethics First initiative. And we'll be working with SIPE, obviously, to spread this message about Ethics First as far and wide as possible. I'll be moderating the session that we have, a brief panel, and our discussion will be on the use case for Ethics First to incentivize compliance through business opportunities. I'm very excited to introduce to you a group of panelists who will guide this discussion. I'll ask them to also now turn on their video and camera so that we can see them. And while they do that, I'll just, I guess, start with the introductions of the 4 panelists. And these are all people from organizations who will be partnering with SIPE and Osoko Insight in rolling out the Ethics First initiative. So our first panelist is Mr. Olusiji Aina, who is a partner at Impact Amplifier, an organization that focuses on getting social enterprises ready for investment. He's a development economist and an enterprise development expert with over 20 years of extensive professional experience spanning financial inclusion, enterprise development, and human capital development. We're also joined by Mr. Itoro Udo, who's the Alumni Community Manager at Fate Foundation. This is a nonprofit with a mission to stimulate wealth creation by promoting business and entrepreneurial development among Nigerians. He manages the growth business services at Fate with a network of over 6,000 entrepreneurs across the country and across sectors. We're also very happy to introduce Mr. Jeffrey Odundo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Nairobi Securities Exchange. An accomplished investment banker, has been in the financial services sector for almost 30 years, the vast majority of which have been in capital markets. He chairs a number of associations and is a member of the working committee of the World Federation of Exchanges. And finally, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Chinyere Almona, who is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Almona has 30 years of diverse experience in establishing standards and enhancing investment opportunities for companies. Her various roles have included leading the Africa Corporate Governance Program of the IFC and establishing the Corporate Governance Risk and Compliance Practice at PwC. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm very excited to get started on this discussion. And I guess in the interest of time, we'll jump right in. My first question is to you, Mr. Aina, and I guess to give us kind of an overview of Ethics First, what in your opinion are the biggest advantages to African and small growing businesses that from participating in Ethics First?
Thank you so much, Bukudis, for having me. It's always my pleasure to be on the program like this. Again, you agree with me that the panelists that spoke while Lola anchored the program spoke extensively on the challenges and the issues around corruption for the big players and the rest of them. Basically, I'm going to focus more on those small businesses, which again, they've been quite disadvantaged over the years because the bigger organizations perhaps are not even interested to invest in them due to lack of sound ethical practices that has been seen over time.
We seem to have lost Mr. Aina. Oh, he's on his way back. Let's just see if we can reconnect with him.
Apologies for the internet issue. I don't know whether you can hear me now.
Yes, you're back, sir. If you can,
okay, thank you so much. So basically, what I'm saying is that most of those small organizations have been disadvantaged because of the perceived lack of standard ethical practices that exist within those the operations of those organizations. But again, I would look at it from this angle. I listened to Lola when Lola said 50% of these small organizations are the informal sector, and about 50% of them, are like well known. But the question again is when we look at it from the point of ease of doing business, and then we'll walk through, to what happens in those small organizations. You will agree with me that even government has a bigger role to play in ensuring that these small organizations or small growing businesses have sound ethical practices in what they do. Why? Because they are the one who perhaps interface with them, provide them with some cash transfers and some kind of support, economic support, in a way that they don't even care who owns those businesses. Majority of those SGBs are either owned by the big players who assemble them for the purpose of siphoning money from the system. But by and large, here's one quick example I want to give. We're doing a work now with GIZ, my organization, and GIZ in collaboration with Impact Investing Foundation of Nigeria. And one very critical thing that I found missing, in most of those interviews that we conducted for the small growing businesses or the small enterprises across the continent, is the fact that a lot of them are also not transparent in terms of their dealings. They are not transparent in terms of what they do. For example, people go out for crowdfunding without even informing those who are investing in them what the purpose of that fund is meant for. And once these funds are gotten from them, then they began to invest into or divert this fund to invest into a different infrastructural development or perhaps a different business entity entirely. So I see Ethics First supporting small businesses to be ethically sound in a way that bigger organizations will be interested in them and be more than willing to invest in them for them to be able to stand the test of time. Because if that does not happen, again, it's going to be difficult for small businesses to grow in a way that they can attract the needed funding, the needed support for them to be, where they ought to be. So I see Ethics First playing a major role, a significant role in supporting small businesses to have that understanding, that marriage, that relationship with the bigger corporations, with bigger investors in a way that they can catalyze some kind of serious economic development and they can stimulate growth within the economic system. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diana. Yeah, I think it's you've really hit the nail on the head there. That subscribing to Ethics First and being a part of this network can very much be advantageous to these small businesses in terms of how they interact, with large organizations and investors, etc. If I can move over to you, Toro Udo. The work that you do with the Fate Foundation, I know you're working with small entrepreneurs and small businesses. Given your experience of incubating new and growing businesses, how do you expect participation in Ethics First to support those companies to scale?
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for that. I would like to quickly jump a bit on what Mr. Olusoji had just said. I remember we had a conversation a couple of days ago, and it also came up. And so we've seen that in few years now, we've seen that businesses, now let me come down to small businesses. We've seen that mostly in the tech space, we've seen how the technology sector has actually been growing at a geometrical rate right now in Nigeria. And most of the funding that we've been seeing coming in that has always been announced over the internet has always been around technology, tech-based business and all that, startups. So looking at that now, coming to another point of view to say, okay, if businesses like that could access funds like that, and then it means that they had a bit of structure around their business. So for small businesses to then begin to participate and see what they could gain from Ethics First, I think one of the things they could gain is leadership. So we're saying that if, let me also borrow a leaf from what Dr. Amy had said, that when there is compliance, no, it was Mr. Mohammed that said that, see, when there's compliance, there needs to be something to say, okay, because you had complied, and there's something to gain. Because you did not comply, then there's something you could have gained that you're losing at the moment. But we've seen that businesses in Nigeria or businesses at large, because over 50% of them, now borrowing from what Lola had said, they play in that space where they're very, very vulnerable, and they could easily fall prey to things like corruption. Now, I know in Nigeria, we have this COMO, which is charged with the responsibility of monitoring, supervising, and regulating several activities that are designated to organizations that are of non-financial dispensation in line with money laundering. So we could see that if small businesses could also align themselves with Ethics First to see that they are able to put structure in their business, and like they have an advisory board, someone to always watch them to say that they are actually complying with rules that have been laid down for regular and ethical business practice. I think they stand a chance to gain that. And also it enables them to begin to be more accountable. And then the issue of integrity now comes in. And then that will, in a ripple effect, open their business to several trading opportunities that are abound and mass out there in the ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I guess those points are one and the same in that there is that ripple effect. I like that word, where it definitely opens up different areas, to these small businesses. But I think Ethics First, by its nature, is not limited to just small businesses. It's really an ethos and an attitude and a culture that we'd like to see across African economies. But if I can move perhaps away from kind of the smaller businesses, and the next question for you, Mr. Dundo, is in what ways do you expect the creation of a network of companies that go through to the gold standard for Ethics First to support capital market development in Kenya and other African markets?
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here, and good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everybody. So I think for us, we basically borrow a lot of what we do here on integrity from a national policy. In our constitution, we have a chapter 6 that speaks to issues of integrity, and that sort of provides like an overarching objective about how Kenyans should adhere to good ethics and best practice. And so what we've seen is that at the now the macro and the industry levels, a number of companies are embracing ethics as a core part of their objectives and actually central to their formations. What we see more recently is companies putting in place ethical policies as part of their key organizational guiding framework, and in some cases even appointing ethical and compliance officers to just ensure that this is actually carried out within a set framework. And what we've seen is that those companies then are becoming like the stars of the industries. They're being considered as really the trailblazers. They're the ones getting increased investment flow. Their shares are performing very well. There's a lot of transparency and there's a lot of growth in those companies. So we're using those as references to really help other companies embrace ethics as a core part of their mandate. And being listed companies, then we have ability to sort of encourage compliance to these. So what we've done also, because we recognize that putting in place such frameworks can be very costly, we've come up with minimum standards of what we call our compliance standards that we also share with the larger and wider public of companies that are unable to afford these. And these are guidelines that we've come on to really make it easier for companies to embrace ethical policies, sustainable frameworks, and areas around compliance and global and best practice in a very, very accommodative way. So a lot of companies that are now coming through our hands, we are carrying out those early preparations before they can actually consider to raise any capital in the market as part of the normal checks that investors would look for. So the stars or the trailblazers are provided that direction that other companies now want to embrace, and evidence is out there that they're performing very well in attracting increased investors.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Mr. Dundo. That's very interesting to hear that companies that already have some of these frameworks in place are performing better than those without. And I think the point you raised as well about having these sorts of frameworks and being at a policy and I think at a constitutional level is very important. For the rollout of again this sort of level of corporate governance transparency in Africa. You mentioned as well, obviously, that these are just standard checklists that investors look like. If I can move to Dr. Almona and ask you, just in terms of that kind of working with organizations and parties from outside the continent, what considerations do African organizations hoping to work with multinational companies need to make regarding compliance?
Thanks for having me, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. First, I must say thank you to Mr. Kamara and Dr. Amy for giving us a great context for this conversation. And it just tells the real story, the real African perspective of things. On the side of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and they're working with businesses, one thing is clear: most small businesses want to work with multinational and be in their supply chain. And I like to say that one thing that they must consider is to standardize their business. So the more formal you are, the easier it is to engage with you. So I always say, try and get your business properly registered, as a legal entity in whatever jurisdiction you're working in. And in Nigeria, you have CAMA, you have other industry regulatory requirements. Try and comply with those requirements. The other thing that they should consider is to pay attention to running their operations according to certified standards, that will promote their brand, because most multinationals kind of align with certain standards depending on the industry. So for instance, the food and medical supplies industry, there will be standards, there are ISO standards that regulate those industries. Try and comply with the standards, because then you show yourself as being you elevate your position before this multinational and make it easier to work with you. And that means to really get to understand your stakeholders. So the multinationals are one of your stakeholders, and you want to understand what they require. What they require from what a multinational in one industry require will be different from another multinational in another industry. Therefore, you want to be sure that you understand the specific requirements, those very specific and things that they require, so they can comply with them. As I considered the Ethics First program, which I found very interesting actually, it caught me that business ethics is one of the foundational principles that businesses need to adopt and formalize. Structure it in a way that it becomes a culture. And I saw one of the charts in the box saying that business ethics is a matter of leadership. And yes, I agree, it's a matter of leadership. So business leaders, small businesses, big businesses, they must adopt good business ethics practices. And as I pondered that, I just wanted to read a portion of a book talking about the efforts that's against corruption. So it says, with the effort against corruption and the intention to promote ethical conduct in their supply chains, large firms and multinationals are increasingly asking SMEs about their ethical policies. However, some small businesses in Africa are not fully aware or convinced of the importance of business ethics and its advantages. Some important advantages of codifying business ethics, so that would list it, and this book is my book, which is the Corporate Governance for Small and Medium-Sized Businesses in African Economies, which I published last year. And so it tells small businesses, that when you think of corporate governance, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but you must structure your business in a way that will attract your stakeholders and ensure that they trust your business. Finally, sustainable business practices are things, it's becoming very common in business world today. Therefore, environmental and social and governance principles, you must adopt them because most multinationals now are thinking of how do they achieve their SDGs. And so they're looking to ensure that those in their supply chain can present certain sustainability credentials. So that would be important to consider as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Olona. I think the points there are definitely well taken. Obviously, formalizing a culture of ethics, it needs to be formal, and the role of leadership there is not lost. Unfortunately, as always, I think there are so many more questions, and we'd love to have this conversation go on. But in the interest of time, we'd have to bring this panel to the end. I would like to thank again the 4 panelists who joined us for this session. We really appreciate your input. And we hope to continue this conversation going forward as Ethics First grows into what we all hope it can become, for the continent. I guess with that, thank you again, and I will hand over to Lola.
Thank you, MK. That was a very interesting panel discussion. Too short, far too short, but all good things have to come to an end soon. Well, I'll take the liberty of giving our panelists an opportunity to say some words if we don't get that many questions. We have 4 more minutes to wrap up, and we have just one question in the chat box in the question and answer function. So please feel free to put in some questions. We'll try to take at least 2 questions in the time that we have. But if we can go through the questions quickly, I'll be happy to come back to some of our panelists. Okay, how can a small, medium company grow in a very corrupt environment to grow into a sustainable model? So I think that's really a question at the heart of what we discussed in the previous panel as well. But I guess panelists who would like to take that amongst the panelists who just spoke. So we see Olusegun.
I'll go first. I'm happy to take that.
Please. Go ahead, Dr.
And I've asked this question severally when I have sessions with SMEs, and they're thinking, how things are so bad. Wherever I go to, wherever the little body I go to, people will ask me for something before they do something for me. And so one thing is, first of all, establish a culture and have a brand for what you stand for, whether you're a small business or not. Let people know you for integrity. Once they know that you are not going to cave in, it may be difficult at first, but you have to be consistent. You can't do it one day and not do it another day. You have to be consistent and deliberate about it. You have to engage with your stakeholders in a way that they can trust you, trust the service you provide. And one of the things that Dr. Amy says is that corruption breeds incompetence. And so if you can demonstrate that you're competent and that your service or your goods is applicable or can be used by anybody because there's quality, then you stand a chance to perhaps not eradicate corruption, of course, but you can thrive in a corrupt society because everybody will know, oh, don't go to that person. Oh, you can't take something from this person. Oh, you can't do this to this person because you stand out. So I think for SMEs, have a brand for ethical conduct and be consistent. Have structures in place whereby you have created a culture, not just as a business leader, but your staff as well must be able to present that same front, which is consistent.
Thank you very much. Yes, as a business owner, I'm sitting in the office. How do I know that my staff have the same orientation around ethics and how they make decisions when they're out in the field. Great response. Let me see. I think we have one more question. Okay, Jeffrey, did you want to chime in on that? And we'll take the last question after you.
Yes, just a quick one. I just wanted to just give an example of what happened here once. So we had this very small company that was just doing the right things. They had the corporate structure, they had the governance, they had the corporate documentation, a good sort of ethical policy, not exactly what should be there. And this company actually attracted a multinational. So to Dr. Chinere's point, you really just continue doing it, have the culture, have the framework in place. Don't mind the size, because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for a very attractive opportunity, something they can take over and transform. So it really starts with the basics, and just stick and just walk the long and lonely path to success, just to support that point. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. I think it's always good to remind businesses of the reality that, look, it's not always going to be smooth sailing, but it's way more rewarding than taking the shortcut. And there are many examples about that. Thank you very much for that. So I'll take the last question, and I think I can answer that. And my response would really touch on something we're working on with Impact Amplifier. And so Olusiji, perhaps you might want to weigh in on that. I think that might also be relevant with Faith Foundation. So the question is, how can SIPE help a startup draft a sustainable anti-corruption policy? I like that question very much because it goes to the heart of what Ethics First is going to be doing for companies that register. We have the Africa Business Integrity Network, and these are compliance professionals who really understand the resource capacity issues that small startups also have. Impact Amplifier, Faith Foundation, these are the kinds of organizations that support small and growing businesses. Sometimes they are really just startups and you really don't know where to start to write your policy. And so the compliance experts working with Impact Amplifier and working with Faith, and probably also working with Dr. Chinere's organization, LCCI, and also the Nairobi Securities Exchange potentially, would really be looking at helping you draft policies that make sense for you. If you're a 5-person business, you have no reason to have a 34-page ethics policy that you downloaded from, Hershey's website or something. We'll help you come up with a policy that makes sense for your business, that addresses your specific operations. We have a fantastic sample of a taxi company, 2-man taxi company, and what an ethics policy looks like for a 2-man taxi company. So that's really what we want you to think about when you're thinking about compliance. It's not the rules, it's not just checking the box, but it's really saying, what are the do's when it comes to ethical issues and the integrity of my business, and what are the don'ts, and how do I make sure that all my employees understand how to make decisions, especially when there's an ethical dilemma involved. With that, I'm just, I think we're 3 minutes over the time to end. So I'm just going to give Olusiji and Mr. Udo 1 minute each to say final words, since I know and I see it in the comments that, most people would have liked for your panel to go on for a little longer. So I'll give you just 1 minute. So 30 seconds, Olusiji, and 30 seconds, Ito Udo, to say final words. And I'd like us to wrap up for today.
Thank you so much, Lola. I really love that part. But let me just quickly respond to what Dr. Amona said. I agree with that totally, but we must begin to look at both the demand and the supply side. We need to begin to work with government MDAs who are supporting these small businesses, the Bank of Industry, for example, in the instance of Nigeria, the Central Bank of Nigeria. They must begin to endorse, or they begin to embrace Ethics One as one of the conduits to drive ethical practices, ethical standards across all the small organizations. It must come to a point where we have to institutionalize Ethics One in a way that we can begin to see it from both demand and the supply side. I just want to thank you for having me on this program. I look forward to more engagement. I look forward to working with you very closely to ensure that the best and the right thing is done across all business sectors, both on the demand and the supply side. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to quickly jump on this, but I would like to use a very unconventional example to this. So we all know the Olympic Games, how athletes will prepare 8 years, 4 years, just because they want to go and win one gold medal, where sometimes some are lucky enough to come back home with several medals. And what happens is once an athlete is found wanting to have cheated, he loses everything. So if there is a system in place to say, okay, if you do this, this is your reward. And if you do otherwise, this is the consequence. So because I see the multinationals like a company, so they're like a community. So if a smaller business is trying to, fall into their value chain and just supply them, and then they spot at some point that this person has been found wanting, the whole of that multinational community should be able to pass that message across themselves to say, there's a red flag on XYZ business, watch out for this business. And I think that is some check, so they don't feel they can do something and get away with it. If they're found wanting, let the whole world know that that business has been found wanting, like they do in the Olympics. This can also check people.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Ito Udo. What you described sounds like the sanctions program of the World Bank and the cross-debarment program. And there's always a rehabilitation process. We definitely want companies to be able to rehabilitate themselves and learn from, what they did wrong and get better. So I think that's definitely an important point. Incentives should be, the drivers, but there should always be consequences as well. With that, I'm so pleased to say we've come to the end of today, but I'm also saddened because this was a very interesting conversation, as was the previous one, and we couldn't just continue the conversations for longer. But I assure you, we will continue these conversations with the speakers in the various countries, especially in Nigeria and in Kenya, where Ethics First is piloting, and of course, in all the other countries where we have partners. We're very excited to kick off Ethics First with all of you, and we look forward to bringing on board, more partners to make sure that small and growing businesses across Africa can, sort of raise their compliance capacity, and international investors, regional investors, the trade ecosystem can benefit from this growing network of low risk and highly compliant businesses. So thank you so much, everyone who took the time to attend. We appreciate you all. Definitely stay in touch. There will be so many more exciting things happening as Ethics First is now available for use. And we will certainly be looking forward to hearing from you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening, your afternoons and mornings, wherever you are. Thank you so much and stay safe.